Hi, welcome. I'm Christian Strain from Cardboard Alchemy. We're here with Luke Laurie, and we're going to be talking to him about Andromeda's Edge. And later, Maximus Laurie, his co-designer, is going to meet up with us and talk about it from his point of view. So, Luke, welcome. Let's talk a little bit about, before we get into Andromeda's Edge, let's talk a little bit about past games that you've done. Dwellings of Eldervale, Manhattan Project Energy Empire, Whistle Mountain, Cryo, Stone of Fate. Am I missing one? There's a lot of them, right?
I think you got it.
Oh, great. Awesome. And then now, of course, Andromeda's Edge. Why don't you tell us a little bit about what it is?
So a little bit about Andromeda's Edge. So
yeah.
Hi, everybody, and thanks for having me on, Chris. So I'm super excited about it. This is a prototype box for Andromeda's Edge. And Andromeda's Edge carries over some of the DNA, as we like to say, of Dwellings of Eldervale, in that it is a worker placement, area control, tableau building, resource management, hand management game. It has a similar mix of a whole lot of mechanics, relies a lot on players thinking carefully about the placements, the different regions of Andromeda where they go, because it uses the similar kind of hexagonal board and worker placement that is based on spatial relationships. So where I put one of my spaceships on one turn is going to determine which kinds of opportunities I'll have on a future turn. And then, of course, there's no downtime. There's no dead turns in this game. As I complete my course of placing my ships out in Andromeda, eventually I'll decide to bring them back to my station. And my station is a custom tableau that I've built by assembling various modules I've acquired throughout the game. And I get to run all of these modules when I pull it back for a really satisfying return. So there's a lot going on in this game, individual player powers. People will say, yeah, it's similar to Dwellings of Eldervale, but it is slightly more complicated, has a little more, dives a little deeper into the individual player powers, a little deeper into the tableau building, and it's very science fiction, as you can see some of the artwork from the game right behind me from one of the factions that you can play.
Yeah. Can you hold up the box again? Show us. That's the retail version, I believe, a prototype of the retail version box. Of course, the deluxe box will probably get a little bit bigger, just a tad bit. Probably more like closer to the old Dwellings of Eldervale box, I imagine. Can you tell us about, for people that know you from Dwellings of Eldervale, and know that game, can you tell us kind of the differences, the similarities? How do they differ from each other?
Well, in Dwellings of Eldervale, of course, you select a faction, and your factions are based on the 8 different elements. And so for each of the elements, there are 2 different factions. For example, fire, you could be the goblins or you could be the ogres. And for the order faction, it could be the dwarves, it could be the centaurs. That connection between an element and the factions is not in Andromeda. So you can take any of the different factions and play them against each other. And the factions in Dwellings of Eldervale, of course, have special workers. They're called units in Dwellings, where they will have special powers that are unique to that faction. Well, Andromeda's Edge has that, but it also has special abilities that are tied to the factions themselves. So each faction has 1 or 2 special abilities that are kind of overriding changes in the way that you can play that faction, in addition to the ability to upgrade your spaceships. And each faction comes with a special custom upgrade that's unique to that faction, but you also have the ability to upgrade any of your other ship types. And these ships, they're your workers. So you have your transports, your fighters, your science vessels, and your heavy cruisers. And over the course of the game, you have the ability to potentially upgrade all of those different types of ships, giving them special custom worker placement abilities that are different from every other player. There are other differences too between dwellings and Andromeda. When you build a dwelling in Dwellings of Eldervale, you of course you give up your workers, one of your units, and so there's this cycle of building your dwellings, giving up your workers, and then summoning in more workers to fill them in. But in Andromeda's Edge, you have leaders, and leaders are strewn throughout the edge of Andromeda. And through the course of the game, you're recruiting these leaders, and you use the leaders to actually they become the leaders of the developments that you build on the planets. But it's not necessarily just one. Some of the developments that you construct, like a factory, takes 2 leaders, a city takes 3 leaders, and then a mighty obelisk, like on the cover of the box. The obelisk takes 1 leader right in the middle to construct it. Right. Another big difference, I kind of touched on this in the intro, is the engine building is more expansive in Andromeda's Edge. The idea of adventure cards in Dwellings of Eldervale is taken to a new level in Andromeda's Edge, where you're going to have all of these different modules that you have attached to your station. And during a turn where you return your ships back to the station, rather than just activating 1, 2, or 3 actions on that pullback turn, using your ships and energy that you produce with your reactors, you might fire off 5, 10, 15, 20 actions on a pullback turn. And that can create this, cascade of engine building that's very satisfying. There's battle in this game, just like there is in Dwellings of Eldervale. So your ships are going against other players' ships. If you're playing solo, you might go against Unity. And then if you're in areas that are threatened by raiders can come striking in, and you might do battle against them. And it uses a similar dice mechanic as in Dwellings of Eldervale, with a few changes. One of them is that you can be playing tactics cards throughout battle. Some of the tactics cards are actually diplomacy cards, where that might change the battle conditions or create a situation where a loss might be a benefit, or it might just end the battle outright, and the conflict that you thought was going to occur does not. There's also this new aspect called targeting, which has to do with when you move in a large group of ships, or if you have ships that are augmented with special abilities, the targeting factor allows re-rolls on low dice rolls. So if you have a higher targeting value, you're going to get more of these re-rolls, and you're potentially going to have a greater advantage because you kind of overcome an opponent with a large force.
So by example, you mean if I bring in 3 ships, my targeting is 3?
Correct.
That means if I roll 1s or 2s, I get to re-roll those.
Correct.
Yeah, that's every time I tell someone when I'm teaching the game, every time I told someone about that new part to the battle that they haven't seen before, their eyes kind of lit up. It's great. What about I would say that's one surprise that people are going to get. Like whenever I was teaching the game and people have known some of your past games, and I would tell them that bit, that's kind of a surprise. What are some other surprises that would come along?
Oh, I think people's eyes are going to widen when they see the art, especially. So when we sat down and we're working on, building various mechanics for this game, we're always drawing from, what's familiar to us and how we think about science fiction. What belongs in science fiction. What belongs in science fiction? Well, the Starship Enterprise, X-Wing fighters, Battlestar Galactica, jumping ships, diverting your energy, shields are up. And then we get this world where Sergio Chavez has come in and he takes these concepts and we think we know what we've created. And then you look behind me and you can see the world that is evolving out of these mechanics, and it's absolutely incredible. So it's not science fiction that people have seen before. It's different, has a different kind of flair. It's the you don't see like the moving joints of mechanics. You see kind of like these more organic shapes and this incredible contrast and light. So I think that that's going to be a big surprise, or something to be excited about with the game. I think that people are also going back to like mechanics. Something I haven't mentioned yet is the diversity between the tracks that players will climb as a result of making progress in the game. So they're called progress tracks, and so as a result of the various things that players have done in the game, like building their developments and acquiring new modules, they can advance on tracks of science, industry, supremacy, commerce, and civilization. And these tracks are a little different from the ones in dwellings, whereas in dwellings, you advance on the tracks and you get to the top, you can get the orb, and you feel like you're powerful in fire or chaos or whatever that track is. But there aren't any benefits that result from progressing on those tracks. So these are much more sophisticated tracks where each track takes you in kind of another direction of engine building and or end game scoring opportunities. So you diversify your game quite a bit depending on which of these tracks you go to pursue through the game.
Yeah, and there's also going to be, or there is currently a video out with Peter Vaughn that's going to be talking more in-depth comparisons between dwellings and Andromeda's Edge. So we'll put a link to that in the descriptions as well. So how did the design start as far as like, what are the origins of Andromeda's Edge?
So I struggle sometimes as I'm not much of a linear thinker. I'm kind of a spatial thinker. So when I think about it, I do recall, like there are some sequence things that I recall, but the evolution of it, the pieces, always come from different places. I'm constantly thinking about new game designs or taking existing designs and how I might change them, other people's work and my own work. And it turns out that some of the concepts for Andromeda's Edge actually predate Dwellings of Eldervale. And the reason for that is I was working on a game that would involve a hexagonal grid and would involve building cities or stations and structures on that, paired with tableau building. And this game that I was coming up with, it had some Battlestar Galactica similarities. We're going to have a big mothership that's sitting on one of the hexes, and you'd be sending out your little scout ships and your fighters to the other hexes and going about your work. But each of these hexes would be a worker placement spot. And as I continued to develop that further, and I started kind of paring down the idea, I got the mothership off the board and turned it more into your tableau. And then I'm like, I don't know about this. It's not quite working. Things are not clicking. Now at the time, so this is about, let's say about 6 years ago. At the time, the concepts for Dwellings of Eldervale were on the shelf. Peter and I had been working, go back about maybe 10 years ago. We come up with these very early ideas for Dwellings of Eldervale. We kicked around some things. We built prototypes. We got them to conventions and protospiels. It kind of worked, and then they fizzled. Kind of worked, and then fizzled. And so at this time, say 5 or so years ago, I had this new science fiction game, and I thought to myself, this could be Dwellings. I could take this fighter, and this fighter could be fighter ship could be a warrior. This little worker transport ship, that could be a worker. And oh, this big one, this could be a dragon. Oh, Peter's gonna love that. So I take this science fiction game and rebuild our concepts for Dwellings. And that became the origins of the version of Dwellings that we know and love. So after I finished Dwellings, after we got Dwellings out there in the wild, I returned to some of those concepts that kind of had been shed off to go away from science fiction to create Dwellings as fantasy, and started building what would become Andromeda's Edge. The evolution and the progress of turning a very, very rough prototypes of this originally into what it became. It was a tough process. It didn't take that much time in chronological time, just a couple of years. But along the way, there were a lot of fits and starts, and there were a lot of versions of this that did not work because sometimes you're building things and you want something to work. You want to try it all these different ways, and you don't know what works until you try it. So I'm very happy with where Andromeda's Edge is now, because I feel like it has all of this different stuff, but it still comes together cohesively in a way where you have very manageable play time. 30 to 40 minutes per player is pretty much what it turns out to be. And that for me is like a sweet spot in game length. So players who play 3 or 4 player Andromeda's Edge are going to find it takes about the same amount of time as a game of Dwellings. In that but you probably feel like you got more done or got farther because of how much stuff you will have created, because the engine building ramps that up faster.
Right. Yeah. For me, it's not, for me personally, it's not the length of the game. It's the length before it gets to my turn. And then this game, it goes pretty quickly until someone hits that engine building turn. But that's a fascinating turn to watch, even if it's not yours, because you're watching them fire off everything. Right. So, yeah, I really like how fast you're getting to do a lot of turns in one game. It's not like one turn and then 20 minutes later, right?
Right.
So you mentioned dragons. I hear that there's dragons in space. You want to tell us a little bit about that?
Well, so as we were working through Andromeda's Edge, we decided that, especially in conversations with Peter and his conversations with artists, that we didn't have to follow all the same rules that everybody follows. The universe that we create, it's not Star Trek, it's not Battlestar, it's not Blade Runner. It might have some echoes and similarities to some of these classic sci-fi, but in our universe, there are space dragons. And so we're excited that there are 2 dragon-related factions in Andromeda's Edge that players are going to choose from. So, and I'm assuming these have been announced by now, but I might be giving something up. But we have the Astro Dracus faction, which is this gigantic space dragon, and we have the Dracanaran Flame Keepers, which are cute little fluffy dragons that fly around on the bridge, bringing peace to the galaxy, I guess. So lots of different options in Andromeda's Edge. And I think as the course of the campaign goes for Gamefound, you're going to see a lot more pretty cool secrets get revealed.
So you mentioned about the engine building in this game, and for me, whenever I was showing this game at PAX U recently, a lot of people would ask, what's your favorite part of it or something like that. And for me, it was the engine building. I really believe that it's improved quite a bit, and I love Dwellings, but that's the next step up for me, is how well that engine building goes. So, what did you do to make that really fire off? Like, what were your steps for saying, I want it to be here instead of where it was before? Like, what inspired that?
So I'm always thinking about new ways to build engine builders. I've always been a fan of engine builders, and some of my early introductions to modern games were games like Race for the Galaxy, and the games like Carl Chudik games, which I'm blanking on all the names of all these things. And then in games where I was able to acquire a tableau during the course of doing other things. I just love the idea of having increased efficiency, and also this feeling of that I've created something. Look what I built. And in each and every game of a game that has enough possible different combinations of components, you can feel like you built something brand new every single time. And so with Andromeda's Edge, I was looking at various ways that you can construct this tableau and have it do a little more. So in Dwellings of Eldervale, you perform an action by putting a unit on the board. And then when you regroup, you get to take that unit and you get to pull it back and you get to fire one action. So it's one when you go out, it's one when you pull back. Now it feels bigger because on your pull back turn, you regroup, you might have 3 units coming back. And that's 3 actions. And that feels awesome because 3 actions is more than 1 action. But then I said to myself, okay, so what if I'm able to take one of my units back here and I can pull it back and I can put it on a reactor. And for folks who don't know, I designed the Manhattan Project Energy Empire. And in that game, you're producing energy. You get all this energy and you're able to fire off all of these cards using all the energy you've produced. And meanwhile, if you're not careful, you pollute the planet and make things worse for everyone. So you have to balance those things. You get into damage too. That's a good one. So in the tableau for Andromeda's Edge, there is a reactor. And so you can use that primary reactor. And if you have bought additional science modules, these science modules are like additional reactors to extend your reactor, and it becomes one giant reactor. And you take one of your ships when it returns to station, and it gets to fire off that whole thing at once. So then mostly that's going to be producing a bunch of energy. And energy allows you to fire off more of your modules. Now, what's very specific in this game is the modules are in 4 rows. So you've got your science modules, your industry modules, your commerce modules, and your civilization modules. And each of these rows has a little bit of a different feel and a different purpose. They function somewhat similarly. So that science row, you fire the whole thing off at once. Then the subsequent rows, you can use energy to activate those modules, but first you have to have a ship somewhere in that row. So that your limiting factor in how many modules you can play is the ships that you pull back. But each ship enables one of the rows. So if I pull back 2 ships, I'm going to be able to activate 2 of my rows. If I pull back 3 ships, I can activate 3 rows. Then after I have a ship, say I have a ship in the industry row of my station, I can now activate all the rest of my modules using energy. And that creates these big chain reactions where I might go from having no resources to having 15 resources, and I got to draw some cards, and I got to climb up a couple of tracks, and it can create some really good feelings. There's some different kinds of modules that will allow everyone to benefit whenever they're used. And then there's also modules that are special end game scoring modules. So acquiring them, they don't function, they don't fire off, but at the end of the game, they'll score. There's another thing that's carried over from Energy Empire, which is in Energy Empire, you have pollution. And your pollution is something where if you've kind of overextended yourself and you don't bother to kind of take care of your nation, then your nation is all cluttered up with pollution. It's not a very nice place to live. Well, in Andromeda's Edge, you have damage, and damage can occur to ships as a result of battle, but damage can also occur on your station, on your modules. So what happens is little damage markers, damage tokens go on the modules, and they can't function until they're fixed. So sometimes some of the better modules, the modules that are going to have like more productivity or higher scoring, they might come damaged when you first acquire them. So if you kind of get a little too greedy, you might grab too many of these damaged modules and you'd be like, I can fix them later. I'll take care of that. No worries.
Yeah, I've done that.
But then periodically, like an energy empire, there are events. And so when an event occurs, it's going to score one of the 5 tracks, the progress tracks. But you get a penalty for each of the damage markers that you haven't repaired on your station. So if you're not taking care of your station, you suffer a penalty. So you can imagine, your people are down there on your station, they're walking around and like, this place is a dump. Nobody ever fixes up all the damage. It's not as great as someone else who has completely taken care of and fixed up their station all nice and neat and functional.
Yep. Yeah, I've done that a few times, and you get enthusiastic when you get the buy. Oh, and I have this card that lets me get a 3rd one on this buy, and then you look down and go, oh, everything's wrecked.
Yeah.
But there's ways of fixing it too that are actually, if you're focusing in certain places like industry and stuff like that, it becomes easier, right? But there's also tactics cards and things you can use to do that. So, yeah, one of the things I really like about and I'm not sure if this is just through sheer play testing or through initial design, but I found that whenever I fire off these engines, it's ching, 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 just you're getting this and this lets me do this and this lets me do this. But by the time you're done, a lot of these engine building games, you end up with a bunch of stuff that you're just not able to use. But I haven't found that in Andromeda's Edge. I might have one piece of ice that I don't have a design for just yet, but it always feels like it's not tight resources anymore, but it's just what I need almost every time I fire off. So is that through just a lot of play testing? Is that through meticulous design beforehand, or both?
You hit on some things. Almost all of my design work is designed by looking at games that I think are great, but frustrate me a little bit. And I'm like, if this game only did this, if this game only did that. And I've had the pleasure of getting to play some games with Tom Lehman, and he's a fantastic designer. Race for the Galaxy. And Race for the Galaxy is one of those games where every single time that game ends, I'm like, no, no, wait, I was just about to do good. I'm not there yet. And that's the intent, because when you're doing design of engine builders can have this ramp up of production where eventually it almost becomes vertical. And so because there's like trajectories in people's productivity, what will happen is they'll get farther and farther apart, to the point where if you let the game too long, your leader's score will be like 5 times the score of the last place scorer. And that can be a very unsatisfying ending to a game. So Andromeda's Edge has various things that kind of force the, how should I say this, where you have natural limits on what you can pull off with your engine building, but you always have the potential choice to be able to run whatever you've done. And that primarily comes from the balance between have you acquired the reactors to be able to produce the energy that you're going to be able to, that you're going to need for that purpose. And so you're balancing, how much do I run my engine? How much do I invest in these ones that are going to score points? And how do I build that engine efficiently? And there's a lot of ways to build that engine where you will get to run that thing several times before the end of the game and feel very satisfying doing so. Let me give you kind of a fun example, which is like in industry, you have everybody starts with 4 core modules that are attached on their station. Well, the core module for industry is where you can build a spaceship or you can perform a repair action. And then adjacent to that would be the modules that you've added on. So you might have 2 modules attached to that for a total of 3 industry modules. But then between them are these little circles, slots. And those slots are where you can put moons. And moons have resources or bonus actions like being able to repair depicted on them. And so when you slot those moons between the industry modules and you fire off the adjacent modules, also get the benefit of the moon between them. So what happens is 3 industry modules can give you 5 actions just right there. And you would run that with a ship and a ship and a ship, or a ship and an energy or something like that. And just those 3 cards, those 3 module cards, can be a really satisfying move. I've played some other engine builders where it was like I worked, and I got that 1 card to give me 1 cube. And
Right.
that isn't what happens here. You get you use that phrase with Flamecraft, piles of resources. Yes, piles of resources, but at the end of your turn, discard down to 5 of each.
Right. Although I will say, every time I feel like I'm getting what I need, it's been very rare that I hit the 5 limit. And when I do, it's not like I'm losing a lot. Like I said, it always seems to hit that nice window of I got what I needed, and I don't have all this excess stuff that's making me question my what I was heading for in the first place. So you mentioned some of your other games, or games that you've played. What are some of your favorite games that you play?
Oh, see, that's a super hard one for me too.
Yeah.
Because part of it is,
let's not say it's your favorite. Let's just say some of your favorite. That way you're not,
as a designer who has, like, I have this full-time career as a science teacher that takes a lot of my time and energy. And believe it or not, I design stuff for that too. Like I design curriculum and I invent science lessons. We build robots. And that's like a whole different part of my life. I don't get as many opportunities as I would like to play new games or even to play classic games. Like you could probably name half of the classic games and I'd played 20% of them. I feel like there are certain games where I've played them and they're like, oh, that's interesting, that's fun. And then there are other games where I played them and it just like clicks so much, where I feel like those are the ones where I focus on not to copy, not to try to emulate, but to capture the magic of that game. So one of my favorite games of all time, of course, is Concordia, in part because it's so simple to explain, and that as you're playing, you have so much depth in terms of your forecasting, the future moves that you're going to make. You have a lot of player interaction, and you have very significant choices, and you can feel brilliant by making the right ones. I mentioned Race for the Galaxy. I've played tons of Magic the Gathering, tons of Hearthstone, played tons of Dungeons and Dragons. When you get to games that have come out in the last 3 or 4 years, I haven't played a lot of them. I have played Flamecraft. I've played Endless Winter. I've played lots of Battlestar Galactica, lots of Dominion. I'm probably forgetting the games I play the most, but I do have hundreds of games, and I've played most of them once, twice, 3 times, sometimes. Yes. I'm lucky that I do get to play games with my son. I have a lot of great game players that also become play testers. But yeah, I do draw from each of the plays. I haven't played Ark Nova yet. I played a lot of Terraforming Mars because that's one of my son's favorite games. So, if it's my son's favorite game and he's going to set it up, yep, I'm playing.
So everybody has a shelf of shame or opportunity, depending on what you want to call it. What game is sitting on that shelf for you that you can't wait to get?
This is the embarrassment section.
This is the gotcha part.
Oh, let's see.
Just imagine that shelf. What's the first one you grab?
I'll answer the question differently. I have had I've had the giant deluxe copy of the Castles of Mad King Ludwig, and I got it like 8 months ago. And there are other games like this that I have, and I'm not going to say, but we finally got it out and we played it because my daughter came home, and she came home from college. That's one of her favorite games. So we played it as a family game, and oh man, that was epic. It's so beautiful. It's a gigantic box, fully deluxe components, and yeah, no longer on the shelf of shame is that one.
That's your most recent one that you've learned?
Yeah.
Nice. So talking about all of your games and stuff, you've played them quite a bit, I imagine, especially in play testing. How often do you win your own games?
A lot less often than you would think. There's a few games. It's funny because I win when I play Concordia. I win more than half the time with different groups. Maybe because people won't play with me anymore. But when I play my own games, I'm probably as likely to win as anyone else at the table. And part of that comes from that so I build these games where you have all of these different choices, right? So Andromeda's Edge, you can have all these different directions, but you will do better if you figure out which ones are the best. And I just think I still, even though I know I made this game, I still think somehow magically I'm going to be able to do it all. And you can't. So I'll be like, oh, I got to go there. I got to get that. If I do a little bit of this and then the game's over and I'm like, yeah, I didn't finish anything. I started. So.
Well, Andromeda's Edge, you can play a kind of shorter game, medium game, or long game. So does that mean that the long game is your favorite to play?
So here's what happens. Game can be a little bit longer, a little more turns also when you play fewer players. So a lot of my plays lately, a lot of my play tests lately have been 2-player. And I hope people agree with me, but I think 2-player Andromeda's Edge is outstanding. I thought Dwellings 2-player was very, very good. I think Andromeda's 2-player is super tight, and I really like it a lot. But it lets you play a lot in that time. And I forgot where I was going. Yeah. So as I'm playing, I'm able to get a lot done in those 2 players, and that's very satisfying.
Nice. Yeah, I was just asking between the shorter, longer, and medium.
Right. And I'd forgotten that. So you can adjust the game length. And so what happens is typically we start with the shorter game length, and then sometimes in the middle we'll be like, hey, you want to make it a little longer, this one? Because I want to play more. And so that's an option that people will have. We can just move the goalpost and play for longer and see how it goes. Or they can be like, nah, I'm winning. Let's play the short game.
Do you find you win more on short games or long games?
Ooh, that's an interesting question. I don't know. I would guess that I win more in long games because I tend to think of these goals that are way out there. But I don't know.
Yeah. Welcome, Maximus Laurie, the son and co-designer with Luke here, and we're just going to talk about some of the same things we've already talked about and bring you in, but get your point of view on what it's like to design with your father. And this is your first time design, is that right?
Right. Thank you for having me, Chris. It's my first credit design, and it's been a blast working on it and thinking of new mechanics and grinding out play tests. I've always been a play tester, but this is my first time stepping up to the designing level as co-designer.
And I'll step in and say that my son doesn't give himself enough credit because, I've been designing games for a little more than a decade, and a lot of hits and a lot of misses, but he has been there as a play tester, as a critic of my work through this entire time, because it's one of the best things that a designer can ask for is someone who can take a look at your work, find problems, find broken mechanics, and offer you suggestions. And I'm very grateful because He has been working with me a lot more on projects as of late, and this is the first time where he will be formally included as with design credits on Andromeda's Edge. And I'm really happy about it.
Great. And as far as code design goes, what are the dynamics like? Who does what? Or is it just kind of shared 50-50 depending on the situation?
Well, there's a lot of the core ideas of Andromeda's Edge were my creation, and bringing them to my son, he's been able to bring in his own ideas for new factions, new cards, and all of this development and all of this design can be very taxing, and you can hit your limit where you kind of run out of steam. And Maximus is able to kind of pick up the baton from there, and further develop factions, further develop cards and ideas, and then take ones that we've already built and work on tinkering them and improving them. In addition, he's just an absolutely excellent play tester, and he can tell you more about that.
One aspect that I think of it as is my dad focuses more on the macrocosm, and I focus more on specifics from time to time. So I'm more likely to insist that a particular upgrade requires just one more range or something along these lines. And some of those have changes have been made, and then I kind of forget about it. But it's like, that's come to define how that faction works. And, there's been times where, in terms of running out of steam, there's been times where it's like, well, this is kind of all there is. And then now looking back, we forget what was even the limit and what's new. And now it's a new, bigger circle.
Yeah,
it's kind of miraculous.
It's kind of interesting because so Maximus was there through some of the work with Dwellings of Eldervale too, and Chris, I know you were, and Peter and I are going way back on our work with Dwellings of Eldervale, and throughout like all of that process, there's a lot of this kind of like taking the creativity of all of the people involved and piecing it together and using everything we've got. So we're very grateful of all the play testers, the developers, and everyone who's worked on art and graphic arts to bring these things together, because it really takes all of those different skills and all of those different perspectives to really make it what it is. But another interesting aspect to that is when I first started designing, they would tell me, you need to make your design so that it's really cheap and easy to produce. And we want to minimize how many cards and make the board smaller. And then Peter and I go to work together, and he's like, okay, I need 70% more content. Can you make these? I see that you've used these tiny chips. Can we have miniatures this big instead? Let's make the tiles bigger, the cardboard thicker. And so Peter, while making Dwellings of Eldervale, making Andromeda's Edge, making Flamecraft, he tries to make this product a thing of art. And as a designer, that pushes you, because it's like, can we get twice as many factions as you've got there? That would be great. This deck of cards, can you have that many more unique cards? I'm like, son, I'm tired. Can you help?
Yeah, it's tricky to come up with new ones, but.
So Maximus, when you have an idea that you want to pitch to your co-designer here, do you have any ways that you kind of set it up, or what's your method for like, okay, I got to show them why? Because I've done a few co-designs before too, and everybody's a little bit different. So how do you pitch the idea?
To some extent, we use actually quantity better than quality, because it turns out obviously quality is very important, but if you're in a particular headspace on a particular day, your concept of what is going to be good quality will turn out completely different than you imagined when you play test it. And if that's the one idea you've been working on, then suddenly you've lost all that time. So when it came to like the tactics cards, for example, we needed more. I generated, I think, 50 ideas total, or maybe more. I can't recall precisely, but it's all about taking the cream from that crop, and
Wow.
so yeah, to some extent, just keep pumping out new stuff, and then just actually testing it. A lot of the elegant interworkings of this game, Andromeda's Edge, and Dwellings of Eldervale, it didn't come very much from analysis. It came from just my dad's heuristic and then play testing it until it worked.
Yeah, we're both pretty good at math, but we find that a lot of times the math doesn't tell the story. The feel and kind of the interactions between the different aspects of the game really determine whether or not something works. And sometimes something can absolutely work and just not be fun. And that shouldn't be in the game. So yeah, that works, but it's not fun to do. Let's put some fun in here.
So, Maximus, we talked to Luke a lot about his games that he enjoys playing. Not his games, but just other people's games that he enjoys playing. What are some of yours?
I do like Terraforming Mars, which I believe was mentioned. I recently tried Dune Imperium, and it instantly became one of my favorites. Dominion, of course. Recently played the best game of Catan I've ever played, which was Game of Thrones. It's basically the same thing, but it just made a world of difference, with a game that's a classic, but you maybe played it a little too much. Just a little changes made a world of difference. And what else? Hearthstone here and there.
I'm remembering some of my favorites I forgot. One of my favorite games is Star Wars Rebellion. That was
good. So I love fun. Being the Empire in that.
I do like a little Star Wars. In fact, we share an affinity for sci-fi. Can you tell me sci-fi or fantasy? Either one of you? Which one's your favorite flavor?
I actually prefer the sci-fi theme. However, I found that sometimes it's I prefer the fantasy theme, and I prefer the sci-fi game sometimes for the mechanics.
Yeah, it's a really tough choice because I gotta say for me it's a little more pick and choose because I'm gonna be Battlestar Galactica, Star Wars, and then it's like, but wait, what are we including when we say Star Wars? And then I'm like, yes, Andor, yes, Rogue One. Then there's some other movies too, and then Star Trek. I'm like, yeah, Star Trek. Well, maybe, yeah, but then there's those. Yeah. So, Lord of the Rings, yes, the new Hobbit movies. Okay, so I think it's pick and choose. I love science fiction and fantasy in general, but yeah, I can be more of a picky consumer. I tend to go towards the stuff that's more serious, like
serious sci-fi, serious fantasy,
like Blade Runner 2049. Just love those films. Mad Max, Fury Road, yes, so good. I like to take things seriously. That's why I'm really happy about Andor and Rogue One, which is taking the Star Wars universe seriously. And I love that angle on it. I like that kind of gritty feeling of things being tangible. And I think there's some of that in this, in Andromeda's Edge. It's gritty. Especially
5-player.
You play 5-player. Oh, it's gritty.
We've talked about the artwork briefly that's in here, and even behind you, that's one of the factions. If you can look behind you, there's little people on top of those. Yeah, I mean, there's so much to each piece of art that you can tell there's like a whole depth of story and stuff in there. Is there anything that you wanted sci-fi wise, just in general, just an idea or something that you pull from sci-fi that hasn't made it into Andromeda in some way, fashion, or form?
Yes, but let me answer a different question first. what may not be obvious is there are people who follow my work on social media or whatever, and have seen early versions, or I've run into them at events within the last couple of years. When you go and you look at the developments, like the obelisk, and but I actually have one of these prototype minis over here. So these obelisks and observatories and factories. So these all started as wood. So I would make these out of wood. They sit on top of the transport ships. The transport ships just started as wooden triangles. The leaders that occupy the little spaces inside the developments. All of that whole mechanic came from components that were handcrafted. So we handcrafted those, in my garage out of wood. And then that leads into like this idea of what is that story? That story is more than just occupying a space with a space marker, a area control marker. That feels more like building a city, building a factory, investing in that. And then, so that's what is included. And that is like how some of that theme kind of rose from those kinds of early prototyping ideas. What's not in this game, hidden traitorous objectives are not in this game. And I do like some of that. We played some traitor games like Battlestar.
So we asked Luke about how many times he wins at his own games and how many times he wins at other games and stuff. How much do you win against your father, and does it sound accurate as to what he told us?
I am slightly higher scoring at the game sometimes than my father, but I think it's because when he creates the thing, he wants everything in the game to be viable, and it is, which is a general selling point of the tabletop games over trading card games. But I would say that's even more true in this game than in Dwellings. If it seems like something is a good idea, it usually is, and so it's kind of fair in that sense. But even so, as a player who it's not directly my child, I'm more able to pick it apart and say this is better than that. I'm not going to do that. So I think that's the player versus designer mindset that maybe provides some small edge. Yeah.
And which do you prefer? Short games, medium games, long games?
Well, totally depends. I think we're going to play 2 games. Then 50 VP is a great end game time. But of course, that's a total of a long game time.
So we talked about engine building quite a bit. What about worker placement? Because it is a worker placement game. What makes a good worker placement game?
That's an interesting question. So, as you know, all but one of my published games are worker placement games, and most of the games that I have in the pipe for the future and that we are working on together are also worker placement games. But all of these games do something different that either hadn't been done before in worker placement or deviates from it enough to have a different feel from other people's work and my own work and our own work. So you need worker placement that does more than go to place A, get thing B. You need multiple reasons for why you would make choices about where to place those workers. And if you need like a really lean, clean worker placement game that's very streamlined, it already exists. You can play Lords of Waterdeep. You can play Stone Age. If you need to play a 7-player game with engine building that's orange, you play Asking for Trolls. It's already made. You don't need another one of those. But to create a really good worker placement game, it has to bring something new to the table, that it's not so similar to something else that already exists, and also still has the magic of familiarity, that it doesn't come together in a way that's clunky. We've played lots of games, of course, and some of the old classics where the standard was you play the worker and you block everyone else. Ha, you lose. I got my second worker or my bonus worker before you did. Now I get more turns the rest of the game. Let's do this again sometime. And so we've seen that, like that already exists. So instead, creating all kinds of other kind of reasons and motives about why you place and where you place. And that's what I focus on in my design.
That's interesting. That makes me think. Someone once asked me, advice for a first-time designer or something like that, and I said you should ask, "Does anybody need this game? Like, does it already exist?" So it's kind of the same idea. What are some of the advices that you would give each of you? What would you give to people wanting to do their first design?
Have a dad that designs games. I can't speak out of school on this one, but you can't be too shy. I know that. So I've been at proto-spiels where the game hasn't been playtested very much before it came to the proto-spiel, and none of the playtests went very well. And so then I'm thinking, wait a minute, like, couldn't they have already known this before they came and then made some changes, and then when they brought it to the proto-spiel, it would have been more productive. So then that's another one where quantity beats out quality. And then once you've ironed out the basics, then you refine the quality further, and then you have a great prototype.
One of the most important pieces of advice it almost doesn't matter if you tell people this, because they still have to go through it. You have to get really used to criticism. You have to get so used to criticism, and you have to, if you think everything you create is already garbage, that's not helpful. So you have to have this optimism, and you have to have this hope. And I do. And everything I create, I'm like, this is going to be the best thing ever. I'm always thinking that as I'm doing my work. But I've become pretty thick-skinned to criticism, and I understand that criticism is going to come in several different flavors, but criticism is going to be absolutely your best tool for improving your work. You have to be willing to put your work out there. You have to be willing to watch it fail, and you have to be willing to watch the uncomfortable feeling of people not liking what you've created. And be like, I think this needs some work. Criticism exists in another way too. You have to accept that no matter how good your work is only good for a fraction of the market. Some people will love your work and other people will not like your work. The nature of games, it's like the nature of art, but it's also like the nature of a functional machine. It's good for some things, it's good for some people, it's not good for others. Other people could take it or leave it. And so understanding that dynamic makes you very accepting of criticism. Oh, you didn't like Dwellings of Eldervale? Oh, that's all right. It's not for everybody. These other people like it, and I'm good with that. I want the people who like the work to get the work and enjoy the work. I want the people who don't like the work to play something else and enjoy that instead. And then throughout the development process, you have to get over yourself. And I don't have to defend my work. I can accept the criticism as that person as providing me with valuable feedback, that either the game is incompatible with their kind of taste, or there is genuinely something wrong with the work that needs to be addressed. And I think part of it is, it's kind of like transitioning. You got to be like, part of the time be in this kind of artistic mindset of I am a creator, and then part of it be in this more kind of I'm a mechanic or I'm an engineer, and I'm going through that engineering process where this is just the iteration. and this iteration is unsuccessful, perhaps the next iteration will meet the criteria and perform the function properly. And when you're shifting like that, and kind of divorcing some of the emotions that might prevent that ongoing work, you can get right back to the creation again.
Nice. And I've noticed especially in co-design that it kind of fosters a remove your ego from everything you're doing, right? So if I put up a idea to a co-designer and they destroy it, I shouldn't feel like they're attacking me. We're just working better for that product, right? And that's something I found in co-design more than just working by myself. So between you two, do you ever feel egos coming? I mean, you have a relationship already, a father-son thing. So does that interfere with it or does it improve it?
Well, I mean, like I said, it's important to have a high quantity of work that's created. And when I know that the majority of it won't get used, I kind of have that mindset, the vast majority of the sun's energy isn't used by us. So I'm aware of that natural phenomenon. And I also try not to get too attached to specific ideas. However, when everything doesn't work and there's maybe only one or two good points, that can be like kind of a downer, and there's nothing to be done about it but try again.
Maximus is at that level where he usually clearly identifies the problem, but the solution takes work. So it's like he knows that that's wrong. That doesn't work. And he comes up with 1, 2, 3, possible solutions to that problem, but they're not the answer. But that ability to identify a problem and that ability to kind of pick apart something and kind of deconstruct where's that fail point? Which part of this is incompatible? That's extremely valuable because sometimes I can be thinking, well, this doesn't work, but or does it? And then there might be that part of me that I still hope it works. I mean, I made that, or I thought that was done, and he can come in with that critical eye and be like, nah, that's broken, or that's too weak, and it needs to be fixed. And I try to model for him, as a parent. If he comes to me and says, "Hey, Dad, that faction you made is trash," and I'll look at the faction, I'll be like, you know what? You're right. That faction is trash, and you're absolutely right. We need to throw that one out and start it over. It just makes the work better if you can accept the faults, you can accept the problems, because but this is similar also to working with development, working with publishers, because publishers are going to tell you your work's crap all the time. They're going to tell you that there are problems that you need to fix, that you got to go back to the drawing board on this, or that it again and again and again. You have to be flexible and think about how you can respond to that constructive criticism to make the work better, because ultimately it benefits all of us when we all found, if we find every single fault, every little detail, every little missed punctuation, every little spelling mistake, the wizard, then we can put it all back together in a way that we're all going to be happy with.
So one more question about basically the relationship between you two. When you play against each other, not just in Andromeda's Edge, but in any game, do you know each other well enough to where you can think they're going to be doing this, so I should do this to defeat them? Like, do you know each other's strategies well enough?
Well, I think we both play like designers, actually. Although I said I'm, slightly more apt to think of something as useless, or this is really good, I must do that, or I'm going to get behind. At the same time, neither of us really sort of try to counter each other's strategies or hate draft. I'm not that type of player. And then, of course, since he designed it, I think my dad will usually just try to try all the different stuff and make sure it all works together. And I do that too intentionally. But even if I'm not doing that, my natural play style, I don't try to undo what other people are trying to do. I'm not totally uninteractive either. I like to interact, but you know, my main way to get a enjoy the play is to just have what I'm trying to do and then try to accomplish it. Then there's unforeseen problems, and then it's fun to try to solve those problems. So it's not like we're constantly trying to outdo each other like a chess game or anything like that. It's fun overall. It's turn by turn.
I say this when people, I see social media posts when people beat the ghosts of Eldervale, or the ghosts of Eldervale beat them. And they'll be like, "Oh, I got defeated by the ghost of Eldervale," and they go, "That means I got the win." And when I play with my son, I win either way. If I win the game, yes, smarter than my offspring. He wins the game, I'm like, yes, my offspring is so smart. I love that. So I love playing games with my kids. I have a daughter too, and I don't attach like that kind of competitive feelings to like the overall feeling of playing a game. In the moment, sometimes there's that, oh, got that one thing that I was after, and then you get that little like tense feeling. That kind of competition it's golden. I love it.
Maximus, the style of play that you were just describing actually sounds like Andromeda, because there's not a lot of take that or I get to mess you up and stuff kind of things. You always get to do the action that you want. This goes back to your worker placement, something different. You always get to do the action that you want, no matter what kind of conflict or something happens. That's one of the things I love about the game. Is that purposeful or just kind of a natural thing that comes from, since this is the way you play games and enjoy games the most, that's just how they get designed?
Battle in both Dwellings and Andromeda's Edge is like a bonus. It's like,
right.
I got to go out and do stuff, and then I got to fight too. I got to build a little house. I got to go exploring and find these little cards, and then we fought a monster, or I battled against raiders, or Maximus is sitting on the planet that I would like to develop, but I have a fighter ship, and my fighter ship is going to go down there and scoop up some resources, and then we're going to duke it out. The battle has rewards for winners and losers, and then those can vary based upon different kinds of abilities and card play. So it creates the battle mechanics create an X factor of interaction and outcomes. When you go into a battle, you're not just trying to win. You might be trying to create a scenario where you prevent someone from being able to develop. You might be looking for an opportunity to play a special card that's conditional upon certain circumstances. But you also might have something up your sleeve where a loss is going to be beneficial, or you're going to be creating dynamics that more players and or AI opponents like the Raiders might be involved in. So I think the initial idea for how the battles and Dwellings came together came from Blood Rage, where the battle starts and then everybody can jump in, and
right.
That exists in Dwellings and exists in Andromeda. In Andromeda, it can be pretty exciting because you can trigger a battle over here on this obscure remote planet. And oh, by the way, there's a heavy cruiser that just jumped in through hyperspace, and it jumps into the battle here too. You hadn't planned that. That's such a kind of iconic kind of situation to have in science fiction, and so you get to feel that story part of things. Whereas I know that sometimes if you're going sci-fi and you're going Euro, you might be thinking, well, I can't have like that much, unpredictability. But it makes it so that everyone at the table is playing everybody's turn. So I am watching while he's playing because he goes in a certain location. It could be triggering a battle. I could have responses to that. And so everybody plays on everybody's turn. And that makes it a lot less downtime and a lot less of that kind of like, would you hurry up already? And instead, there's this tension of watching the opponent and what they can do and thinking about how I can respond. And that's pretty intentional. That kind of interaction is, I think, kinds of things that I look for in a lot of the games that I play.
Nice. One last question. There's a lot of factions that we're talking about in the game. They're all asymmetric. They all have different abilities. How do you balance those, and which ones are currently your favorite?
Ooh. And there's probably some factions you haven't heard of, which we probably can't tell you about, that might come out through the campaign. I sure hope they come out through the campaign. Let's focus on the core 8.
So an example of an asymmetrical faction, which is in the base game, is the Arcanoan shipwrights. They're pretty sleek and streamlined. And you're basically focusing on building special ship upgrades, gaining civilization modules. These two things. Other factions are more symmetrical. For example, the Dark Star acolytes can choose any of the 6 alliance bases with their power, and there's a lot of different routes you can take. But in general, even the asymmetrical factions in this game are actually pretty symmetrical compared to other games, for example.
So you're talking about their versatility as your symmetry equation. So which one did you say was your favorite?
I didn't say what my favorite was. I need to think.
Which of your children is your favorite child?
Right.
And why do you hate the others?
Whichever one is asking is your favorite.
Like Funganar. You're partial to the
I'm going to answer for the Funganar because so I don't know too many games where you get to play a science fiction fungus faction. I'm sure there's some out there. So the idea is the Funganar are carbon based, and as a result, when you go to build any of your developments, your obelisks or your observatories, you can actually build them all out of carbon. So as long as you've collected enough carbon, you can build them. And where do you get carbon? You get carbon from decomposing spaceships. So when the ships are blown up and they're in the scrapyard, the debris, beginning of your turn, you get to grab a carbon. And so you can just keep getting that carbon as ships are rotting away, and then turn that right around and grow your fungal developments. They've got a ship that's their transports that, you can, they're not tough and they just go about their business. But if you beat one up and damage it, it blows up, and toxic spores are going to damage everything in that region. So you got to watch out for those.
I will say, when I was demoing the game at PAX U, there was someone who, as they were reading out their faction, that was the Funganar, they started reading and they were just getting more and more excited about the story that is in those abilities. And as they were playing, it was almost like, I can't remember if they won or not, and it was a demo, so it was shortened. But I remember at one point, they were just like, and my ship explodes. Like they were just so into being the Funganar from step one, from reading those abilities, and that's great to see.
And I am a very mechanically focused designer, but when I'm looking at things that are like card play and things like individual player powers, if I start with the landmark of I'm going to build a fungus faction, I'm thinking about what fungus does. What do I associate with fungus? And how can I make powers feel very fungal? Because I know that feeling of playing other games where I really just rolled a die, moved a number, and moved a couple of tokens around. But I felt like Chewbacca just blew up the Death Star. And that story that I got to tell when that happened, that's a great feeling. And so when we're designing, we're talking through. That's why the names are very important of these abilities and these factions, that the art comes together to tell that story. So each of these abilities is very thought out. So you never get a faction and just be like, well, why does it do that? I don't know.
Because it works. Mechanically.
There's none of that in this game. Everything will match the story and intent of the theme.
I think I'll say my favorite is the Mecharon Synthborn for 3 reasons. 1 is the theme. 2 is the fighter. The fighter only has 2 dice, which I think is good design, because an easy way to make it good is just make it buffer. But it is very good. And there's stronger fighters, but that one's very fun to use because of the written effects. And then the 3rd reason is because it gives you a science boost, and grabbing science tokens is one of my favorite and funnest things to do in the game.
All right, well, thank you so much, Luke and Maximus Laurie, both for showing up and talking about Andromeda's Edge and just some of your personal preferences and designing and what that's all about. The campaign's going soon, or will be on at this point. So why don't you just tell us a little bit about that, and we'll be off.
Well, Cardboard Alchemy's putting together yet another incredible campaign. This crowdfunding campaign is on Gamefound, and I'm sure it will be easy for you to find, but we are very grateful that Cardboard Alchemy is putting this together, and we're going to be extremely excited if you support us. And so look for all the surprises and new things that are going to be coming up, and it was a pleasure talking with you. Appreciate it.
Thank you for having us, and thank you for the support on Gamefound.
Thank you so much. Look in the description for links to the campaign. Thank you.